Hello again, ladies and gents. I'm Andyb, and happy Halloween, everyone! It's the season of scares, time to get festive, bring out the orange border! Actually, you know what? Never mind. Now, if I'm being honest, ever since I passed my trick-or-treating days, I don't really get too excited for Halloween. Mostly because I'm kind of paranoid and scare really easily.
Steal your soul.
My more recent Halloween tradition includes watching It's the Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown and listening to copious amounts of The Misfits, Slayer, and Avenged Sevenfold. Nightmare! But that being said, I still wanted to do a special video for Halloween. And I thought, what better way to celebrate the holiday than by reviewing a spooky, scary animated show. Because if you have a fear of big blue monsters and late 90s CGI, then it's your fucking nightmare, man. It's Monster by Mistake. Monster by Mistake is a Canadian animated series created by Mark Mayerson and produced by Catapult Productions, where Mayerson worked, and CGI Entertainment. The show initially aired from September 1999 to March 2003, and had a total of 52 episodes spanning over 3 seasons. So right off the bat, you probably have some questions. Like, what the hell is this show? Why is Bootleg Thanos here? And who exactly is Johnny the Ghost? All these questions and more will be given half-assed comedic answers in due time. So prepare for scares, ladies and gents, as we take a look at Monster by Mistake. Despite its appearance, Monster by Mistake has a surprisingly interesting history. It has deep roots in Toronto, Canada, and was an early adopter of Houdini, a 3D animation software developed in Toronto. And fortunately, with a healthy dose of Google searching, I was able to find some great resources for information. Using the Wayback Machine, I was able to find an old official Monster by Mistake website, and it had a lot of cool behind-the-scenes info and pictures. Like, here's some pictures of the team in the studio, here's some pictures of an episode in progress, and here's a picture of some of the team on their lunch break. And here's a picture of me in the exact same spot about 20-something years later. Yes, I actually went to find the spot. It was a Saturday well spent. Furthermore, a YouTuber by the name of GeoTV1 did a great interview with series creator Mark Mayerson for his radio show and podcast, The Geo Show. For those who are interested, I'll leave a link to the full interview in the description. So with all this rare information in my possession, which I'm willing to wager most people have never heard, I wanted to start this review with a relatively brief history of the show's development. Monster by Mistake's origins date back to the mid-90s, as a script for the pilot was written in the fall of 1994. Initially, the project was being worked on by 2 people, future series creator Mark Mayerson and Catapult Productions founder Kim Davidson. Throughout 1995, Mark and Kim worked on the project, creating all the characters, locations, and a 2-minute trailer to help sell the show to broadcasters. Now initially, Monster by Mistake wasn't pitched as a TV series. At the time, they learned the only animated TV specials broadcasters were interested in were seasonal specials, specifically Christmas or Halloween specials. So they pitched the Monster by Mistake pilot as a Halloween special, hoping to turn it into a proper series if it was successful. Later in early 1996, Catapult partnered with Cabium, later renamed CGI Entertainment, to help sell and distribute the show. Finally, in June 1996, Canadian network YTV bought the pilot and aired the half-hour special in October 1996. The pilot would continue to air on YTV as a yearly Halloween special up until the series' debut. As Catapult and Cabium continued to look for broadcasters to fund the making of more episodes, they also had to contend with network sensibilities, as YTV and other networks initially found the show's tone to be too dark.
The person in charge of children's television at YTV said, being a monster can't be like having a disease. Being a monster has to be fun. My attitude towards the show was that turning into a monster on an involuntary basis was a metaphor for any kind of a problem a child might have. For me, the point of the show was, even though you've got this problem that you can't fix, you still have to find ways to go forward in your life. The thing about broadcasters, especially when it comes to children's television, is their greatest fear is that they're going to offend parents or have advertisers complain to them. And so they have a tendency to try to water down everything they do to prevent any complaints.
After a long period of discussion and finance gathering, Catapult and Cabium finally acquired all the necessary funds to make the series in February 1998. They hired a larger crew, and a few months later in June 1998, Studio 345 opened in downtown Toronto, and work on the first season had begun. And their perseverance and efforts had paid off, as the show's first season was well received. The initial order was for 12 episodes along with the pilot, and before the series even began to air, it was renewed for another 13 episodes, which would become the show's second season. And there you have the origin story of Monster by Mistake. Talk about the little 3D show that could. It's really commendable how it grew from a 2-person pilot to a fully fledged series. But now that we're through with the history lesson, we can move on to the finished product itself. Now, if you've seen any of my other show reviews, this one's going to be structured a bit differently. And that's because Monster by Mistake is the first show that I've talked about that has an ongoing narrative, albeit somewhat partial. I'm going to critique each season individually and then compare and contrast. Now, with all that being said, let's begin with Season 1. To properly introduce you to the show, I'm going to give a general summary of the pilot episode, later renamed The Jewel of Fenrath for home releases. 8-year-old Warren Patterson is a fairly typical suburban kid. That is, until the night he and his sister Tracy head inside the old Amberson house. Inside, Warren and Tracy meet Gorgul, a tiny purple demon who's trapped inside a magic glass ball, hell-bent on ruling the world, and accompanied by his dim-witted servant. Pretending to be innocent, Gorgul asks Warren to read a spell from his book in order to free him. Warren obliges, but misreads the spell and casts a different one on himself. Following the failed spell and Gorgul's ranting, the kids rush out of the house. But on their way home, they make a small discovery. Now every time he sneezes, Warren becomes a giant blue monster, more commonly referred to as the Monster. So the kids return to the Amberson house to try and reverse the spell. This is when the kids meet a ghost named Johnny, who lives at the Amberson house. He quickly becomes friends with them, and Warren and him bond over their love of the trumpet. Johnny goes upstairs to kick Gorgul out, but ends up getting knocked out instead. The servant finds Warren and Tracy and ties them up, but after a quick monster transformation, they get free. Gorgul's servant attempts to read a spell and free him, but Warren and Tracy intercept the spell casting. Following the failed spell, a giant portal appears, pulling Gorgul and his servant inside, and destroying the Amberson house. Warren and Tracy save Johnny, and they appear unharmed following the crash. Since now he has nowhere to live, Warren and Tracy offer to let Johnny stay in their attic, and Johnny happily accepts. As far as pilots go, I'd say this one's alright. It does a fairly good job introducing its main characters, establishing its premise, and creating intrigue to see more. And more was on its way. But before I get too ahead of myself, let's properly introduce the main characters. First off, Warren Patterson, the titular monster by mistake. And he's just a regular kid like anybody else. He likes playing soccer, cracking jokes with his friends, eating pizza. He just also happens to turn into a big blue monster when he sneezes. But hey, who hasn't? I mean, we've all been 8 years old and 3D at some point in our lives. It's just a part of growing up. When in his monster form, Warren becomes stronger, taller, more agile, and, more blue. However, his voice and personality remain the same. So despite his massive size and strength, he'll still be scared by something like thunder or the dark. But he has a good heart, and isn't afraid to step in when his friends need help. Warren's likable personality, paired with his good nature, make him a good kids show protagonist.
Excellent!
Next up, Warren's older sister Tracy, a compassionate preteen with a mild interest in the arts. After the events of the pilot episode, Tracy obtains the Book of Spells and the Jewel of Fenrath, and she becomes the show's primary spellcaster. Though she gets better at casting spells and learns more of them over the course of the show, most of the time the spells don't go according to plan. And that's usually where the conflict of an episode comes from. One of my favorite aspects about her character is her relationship with Warren. It's a lot more positive than a typical kids show's brother-sister relationship. It's a refreshing change of pace to see a kids show where a younger brother and older sister actually get along. That being said, they obviously argue and disagree like siblings do. But overall, they're mutually supportive of one another. Alongside Warren, Tracy makes a good co-protagonist.
Yes, I'm definitely... Ow!
Now I want to tell you about Johnny the Ghost. He's a wisecracking, trumpet-playing friend. It says so right in the theme song.
He's a wisecracking, trumpet-playing friend.
Which, by the way, just to quickly get off topic, is a really fun theme song. I mean, it's an upbeat ska tune. It's like it was handmade for me.
Hi, my name is Warren, and I'm just a kid like you. Or I was until I found evil Gorgle's magic jewel. I'm a monster by mistake.
Alright, look, no matter what I say in the rest of this review, I give this show a tip of the cap for having a kick-ass ska theme song. Anyway, back to Johnny the Ghost. Simply put, he's one of my favorite characters on the show. He's a laid-back, jazzy ghost with a love for food and a knack for puns. I also like the dynamic that he has with the kids. He acts as a sort of mentor/parental figure, and specifically towards Warren, a trumpet teacher. There's a number of scenes where Warren and Johnny are jamming together, and they're a lot of fun.
Take it!
But lest we forget, Johnny's a ghost, and he possesses many classic ghost abilities. He can fly, turn invisible, and pass through solid objects. Though his transparency seems somewhat selective, at the very least he can turn it on and off. His ghostly abilities prove to be very useful when helping the kids get out of trouble. Johnny rounds out the main trio really nicely, and overall they make for a solid set of protagonists. But of course, we can't forget about our main villain, Gorgul, the tiny purple demon who's trapped inside a glass ball. His rugged appearance and gruff voice make him a solid, intimidating villain for a kid's show. But his single-minded focus on getting the book and jewel does make him a bit of a one-dimensional character.
We need that jewel and the book of spells so I can be free from this accursed ball. Cursed ball. Get the book and the jewel of Fenrath.
But then again, if I was trapped in a tiny glass ball and forced to hang out with this guy all day,
I'm a happy monkey.
Getting free would be my main priority too. Being that Gorgul's powers and movement are restricted, he acts as the brains of the operation, coming up with numerous evil schemes. And when he's not busy cursing his position as a prisoner, Gorgul is often berating his servant for his idiocy.
I know what they are, you fool! Oh, you fool! The boy is the monster, you fool! You idiot! You dyspeptic fool! I've wasted my magisterial time on someone with the intellect of a flea!
Huh?
Speaking of which, Gorgul's servant. He whose name is never officially stated is the bumbling right-hand man who's almost more trouble than he's worth, blindly following Gorgul's orders and acting out his evil schemes. We don't really know a whole ton about him. The most that's explained is that he's helping Gorgul for an unspecified reward. I mean, it could be a pile of cash, a gold bar, a freaking Mars bar for all we know. While he's far from the most interesting or engaging character on the show, the servant, pun partially intended, serves his purpose as the dim-witted sidekick pretty well.
Master, it's a witch!
First, there's Billy Castleman, the neighborhood bully who likes picking on Warren in particular. And he's a textbook bully character in every sense of the word. He's big, kinda stupid, wears a backwards cap, and his name's Billy. That's like the generic bully kid name. You're looking at the gold standard here, folks, a true professional in the field. Though he may be somewhat cliché, Billy fills the role of minor antagonist really well, always looking to mess with Warren in some juvenile way.
Looking for your big sister?
Then you've got Warren and Tracy's parents, Roz and Tom Patterson. A couple of good-natured, working parents, with Tom being a bus driver and Roz owning an antique store. They're also another set of characters Warren has to hide the monster from. Pair this with the ghost living in the attic, and the Patterson home is basically a house of terror. In terms of character traits, Roz is notable for her reliance and trust of experts, constantly turning to the advice of different books. And Tom's defining trait is his straight-laced, sarcastic attitude. He also doesn't believe in the supernatural, believing that the monster is a guy in a suit.
Who is this mysterious creature?
It's a guy in a suit. The monster, it's a guy in a blue suit. Some ad campaign.
As far as parent characters go, Roz and Tom are pretty good.
It's a metaphor, Tom.
For what?
For, well, you know, it's a metaphor for, well,
Right.
I'll look it up.
Yeah.
Then there's Warren and Tracy's Aunt Dolores, a police officer who's always on the case, and not very good at her job. I mean, I give her credit. She seems to be the only cop in this town who's actively doing her job. Either that or the Pickford police force is incredibly understaffed. Dolores is assertive, by the book, and always looking to help out, even when it's not exactly asked for. She also serves as another minor antagonist, having it out for the monster and wanting to put the perp behind bars. Though she's defined by her mostly goofy nature, it's interesting to note that she wasn't always meant to be so comical.
Also, I definitely wanted to have a police officer in the series who would be trying to track down the monster. They felt that was too scary for children. And so the police officer ended up being the main character's aunt. So there was at least a familial connection there, which they felt would make the police less scary to the audience.
Having Dolores be a more legitimate threat to the monster definitely would have been interesting to see. But then again, if it wasn't for goofy Dolores, I wouldn't have the face for my plagiarist police. And we would miss out on all this great family banter.
Oh yeah, just like you didn't need my help learning how to ride a bike.
I was 6 years old.
And you went down like a bag of wet cement.
So I guess I can live with the Aunt Dolores that we got.
Did he attack you too?
No, he told us a joke.
He threatened you with comedy?
And now, just to quickly rattle off some repeat minor characters, there's Freddy, Warren's best friend who constantly tells bad jokes.
What did the cat say when he met the mouse? I don't know. Pleased to eat ya!
Hilarious.
There's Susan, Tracy's best friend who's very dramatic and artsy.
I'm a polluted tree. I'm in mourning for my life.
There is trouble with the trees.
And finally, Miss Gish, Warren's teacher who's apparently quite the adventurer.
I've climbed Mount Fujikakao with only a backpack and a bottle of seltzer.
Oh, I am so impressed.
Like I mentioned before, Monster by Mistake has an overarching story and lore across its 3 seasons. But similar to that of Teen Titans, the overarching story only develops in specific key episodes, while the other episodes are mostly standalone and self-contained. In Season 1, most of the overarching plot development happens in the first few episodes. We've already touched on the pilot, so let's look at Episode 2, Pizza Day. This was the first episode produced for the series, and it's a direct follow-up to the pilot. The premise is that it's pizza day at school, and Warren's excited. However, his constant sneezing worries him that he'll turn into the monster at school. So he tries to counteract his sneezing with a clothespin. The first half of the episode deals with Warren trying to keep himself from sneezing at school.
Oh, Warren.
Warren? Billy Castleman.
Where's that monster?
What monster?
I saw him go in there. Warren's the monster.
I mean, you have to give the kid credit. He's had this figured out since the start.
You're a monster. Objection!
I'm not.
Take that!
The second half of the episode deals with the return of Gorgul and his servant. They've returned to Pickford after the events of the pilot, and they track down Warren demanding the book and jewel. The episode ends with a giant chase scene, including Warren heading back to school, Gorgul being used as a soccer ball and later mistaken for an action figure, Warren's teacher Mrs. Gish interrogating the servant, and Billy running out into the street about to get hit by a car. Warren jumps in to save Billy, but he's less than grateful. And then Warren runs off, marking the first public appearance of the newly dubbed Pickford Monster. The Pizza Day episode establishes 3 of the series' core plot elements. Warren trying to keep the monster hidden in his day-to-day life, Billy trying to expose Warren as the monster, and Gorgul trying to get the book and jewel back. The episode covers a lot of ground, but keeps a steady pace throughout, and I'd say it's generally engaging from start to finish. As a follow-up to the pilot and a kickoff to the series, Pizza Day is pretty solid. The next bit of plot development comes from the 3rd and following episode, Just Desserts. The basic premise is that a spell goes wrong and turns Warren and Tracy's parents into ice cream sundaes. Not knowing how to change them back, they reluctantly seek out the help of Gorgul, being that he's the only other one who knows about the book. This episode is the first time we see Gorgul's hideout, located in the storm cellar of the destroyed Amberson house from the pilot. This is where Gorgul and his servant reside for a majority of the series. This episode is also where the kids learn how to reverse spells.
Brickenblackson?
Well, it doesn't work on every spell, but on this one it will. Just repeat the original spell and then say Brickenblackson.
The technique of reversing spells is used multiple times throughout the series. I also like how they covered their tracks by saying it doesn't work on every spell. Otherwise, you'd probably wonder why they don't just reverse every spell that goes wrong. It's a nice bit of future-proofing. And that's pretty much it for the overarching plot in Season 1. Every other episode is just another day in the life of the Patterson kids. Being that majority of the season is self-contained episodes, it makes sense they'd want to put the plot-establishing episodes right up at the start. Monster by Mistake is a well-put-together show. And while it may not reinvent the wheel with every story it tells, its strength lies in its execution of those stories. The show's core writing and storytelling is pretty solid, and it maintains a fairly consistent level of quality throughout the season. Even with its few generic characters and story elements, they're good executions of those cliches. That's not to say Monster by Mistake doesn't have its own unique characteristics, it's just that it has a lot going for it even on a fundamental writing level. But where Monster by Mistake really shines is in the smaller details. For starters, the animation. I know this may look primitive compared to 3D animation we have today, but I really have to stress to you that this was impressive. And a big reason for that is the great lighting effects. After all, everything we see in the real world reacts to light, so when lighting is properly represented in animation, especially 3D animation, it makes it look more natural. That's not to say Monster by Mistake looks realistic by any means, but the models actually feel like physical objects interacting in an environment. And you have to remember, they had to create these lighting effects manually. They didn't have a setting they could just turn on. I think this is something that gets taken for granted in the current era of 3D animation. Because now, natural lighting effects are the standard. Back then, it was an achievement to have effects like Johnny's transparency or the reflection of Gorgul's glass ball. And the fact that the lighting crew were able to consistently execute these effects on a regular basis is a testament to their talent. But it's not just the animation, the writing has a lot of polish as well. I mentioned there are scenes where Warren and Johnny are playing their trumpets together. As established in the pilot, Johnny's a skilled player of many years, while Warren's still learning. And when they play together, you can hear the difference in their skill levels. Another aspect of the writing I like is the back and forth between Tracy and Warren. Being the older sibling, Tracy tends to be the voice of reason, cautioning Warren about recklessly using the book and jewel. But there's multiple times where Tracy makes a bad move and Warren calls her out for it. I like that there's a balance between who's lecturing who. It gives their dynamic a bit more depth. And I already mentioned the episode Just Desserts, where we learn about reversing spells. They mention that it doesn't work on every spell, so it doesn't become a cop-out solution to every spell-related problem. The writers really knew how to cover their tracks and didn't leave too many burning questions unanswered. While I have a number of positive things to say about the animation, it's certainly not perfect. This season has a bunch of animation glitches. For example, in the episode Just Desserts, towards the end of the episode, you might notice Tom looks a bit different, almost like he's wearing makeup. I think they used the facial texture for Roz by mistake. The ones I noticed the most were with the character's eyes. Whether the pupils appear above the eyelids or a character's pupils were crossed in a weird way, rendering the eyes seemed to be a bit problematic. However, I am willing to look past these glitches as they don't really impede the episodes, and 3D animation for TV was still in its early years. My second major complaint is regarding location. You'll see this mostly during certain chase scenes, where the characters instantly jump between locations that seem farther apart. Like 1 second they'll be downtown and the next minute they'll be at school. I'm pretty sure they're not right next to each other, and seeing other angles of these places from different episodes, you wouldn't get that impression either. It can be a bit disorienting, and makes the town feel disconnected in a way, like it's just a bunch of set pieces stitched together, rather than a cohesive location. Season 1 has a number of good episodes, but I'm just gonna touch on a few of my favorites. I do enjoy the plot-developing episodes, such as Pizza Day and Just Desserts, but since we've already talked about those episodes, I'm going to focus on my other favorites. Roz unknowingly sells the Book of Spells at a school rummage sale to a strange white-haired man. Warren, Tracy, and Johnny follow him in hopes of getting it back, and they end up at the Pickford Museum. All the while, Billy is there, harassing them and trying to expose Warren as the monster. This is just a solid episode overall. It has a variety of characters that are all put to good use, the story is engaging and well-paced, and there's a satisfying resolution. But for my money, the episode is carried by the character of Dr. Henry Fossil, the man who bought the Book of Spells. He's the head of paleontology at the museum, and he's a bit of an eccentric fellow. His jittery mannerisms and ramblings make for some of my favorite scenes in the episode.
Approach.
How did you dig him up?
With a shovel, of course. I find them everywhere, all over Pickford. People walk on them, buses run over them. I like this book. I'm going to put it on my coffee table at home. Right beside the bones of my saber-toothed tiger.
He's also noteworthy for being the only human character the kids talk about the book and jewel with. Because of this, you'd think he'd be a more important character throughout the series, but sadly, he's not. He makes a few other appearances, but they're not as significant. He also seems to have no knowledge of the book and jewel in later appearances. And that's a shame, because I liked the idea of the kids having a confidant that they could talk to about the book and jewel. But then again, I suppose Johnny already fills that role, so it would be kind of redundant. At the very least, Dr. Fossil's first appearance was a pretty good episode. The premise is that Johnny is getting too careless and is in danger of being seen. After making a surprise invisible appearance at lunch, Roz suspects there's a ghost in the house and calls in a ghost exterminator. I like the premise and the setup, and there's some good scenes throughout, but this episode's writing is weak in places. There's a very forced character reveal later in the episode, and there's a very cop-out explanation for a certain event. I still enjoy this episode, but to call it one of my favorites is actually a bit of a stretch. However, I did think this episode was still worth mentioning, and I didn't really know where else to do it, so here we are. It's the first appearance of Aunt Dolores, the first appearance of the character Malamar, who makes a couple other appearances, and it's also the first Johnny-focused episode. And about 9 minutes into the episode, Johnny delivers one of the most dramatic monologues in the entire show.
I've seen a few ghosts exterminated in my time.
You have?
How? What happens?
Well, it ain't pretty. First you turn kind of green, then you just get weaker and weaker until eventually you just fade away.
For how long?
Forever, kid.
Forever?
But hey, that won't happen to me. I'm Johnny B. Dead.
Johnny, you can't just have a war flashback about watching your fellow ghosts get exterminated and then follow it up with a, "Hey kid, don't sweat it, let's have some more of your mom's chili." You're gonna give the kids emotional whiplash. A flawed episode, yes, but Haunted House is a memorable one for sure.
What if someone sees you?
They won't! I never slip up!
And finally, my favorite episode of Season 1. The premise is that Roz and Tom are heading out for the night, and Warren and Tracy have the house to themselves. But Gorgul learns about this and decides it's a perfect time to strike. This episode has a few key details that set it apart from the other episodes in the season. It's the first episode to take place at night, it's the first episode where Gorgul operates on his own, albeit briefly, and it's one of the only episodes where Johnny isn't present for the majority.
Umberto Ungolisi's one of my favorite singers too, so I thought I might tag along.
This episode is also jam-packed with action scenes. They make the most of the 22 minutes, and even with a lot happening, the story moves at a comfortable pace and doesn't feel rushed. From its unique quirks to its quality writing, Home Alone is a standout episode from Season 1. While there aren't any episodes I'd call downright bad, there definitely are a few weak episodes. One that comes to mind is Episode 10, Entertaining Orville. The premise is that Warren and Tracy want to buy a new video game, specifically a CD-ROM game.
We're pooling our money to buy a new CD-ROM.
Just in case you forgot when this show came out. They try to earn some money by offering to perform magic tricks, and a woman hires them to entertain her son Orville. Tracy tries her best tricks, but Orville is unimpressed. So Tracy tries to impress him with some real magic, and the spell ends up bringing Orville's toy robot to life.
Surrender or be destroyed.
My main problem with this episode is with Orville's mom. She's a very eccentric character, kinda like Dr. Fossil, but not as endearing, in my opinion. At one point in the episode, she takes the jewel mistaking it for one of her own, and Johnny has to retrieve it. This whole side plot really bogs down the pace of the episode. It's also a bit redundant. with her not believing in ghosts and Johnny convincing her otherwise. It's something we've seen the show do better in a previous episode, and the whole sequence really just distracts from the main plot. That being said, the main plot with the toy robot coming to life is okay, but nothing spectacular. Maybe if it wasn't being interrupted so frequently, the main plot could have been better developed. A middling main story paired with an interruptive side plot, and you've got a recipe for mediocrity. Judging solely based on Season 1, I'd say Monster by Mistake is a pretty good kids show, with a nice attention to detail. The town of Pickford is full of colorful characters, the voice actors are giving great performances, and the episodes are full of fun antics. For their first attempt at a 3D animated TV series, Catapult Productions and CGI Entertainment did an outstanding job. But this is just the start. So let's see how things progress as we move on to Season 2.